Welcome to Fight Back Radio, a production of fightbacknews.org, taking you to the heart of the people's struggles. I'm your host, Richard Berg, and I want to welcome people back to another exciting episode. I want to thank our listeners for tuning in, but especially I want to thank you for telling your friends, your comrades, your co-workers, whoever, to listen to Fight Back Radio. We're growing, and we want to keep that going. And I want to thank also those who wrote in at our website or at our email address, richard.fightbackradio@gmail.com. That's richard.fightbackradio@gmail.com. We have a really good guest for you today. Today's guest is an organizer in the streets of Los Angeles. Marisol Márquez is a strong Chicana who works with the Centro CSO. And this is an organization that has an important history, but also, I think, an important present. And Sol is, just a vibrant force within Centro CSO, and she brings, a theoretical perspective, not from the classroom, but from the streets and from organizing in the people's struggles. And I think you're going to really enjoy this. Marisol wrote a pamphlet, which you can get at fightbacknews.org, called My Journey to Aslan. And I think it's an important read. I think you should check it out. We'll put it in the show notes for you as well. But now I want you to enjoy Fight Back Radio's interview with Centro CSO organizer Marisol Márquez. Welcome, Marisol, to Fight Back Radio. We're excited to have you here and to talk a little bit about what's going on in Los Angeles and throughout the West Coast today.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be here.
So you're active in the community service organization, or the Centro CSO, and this is an organization with a long storied history. Could you tell us a little bit about that?
Yes, absolutely. So Centro CSO, or Community Service Organization, it wasn't always known as Centro. We added that part recently just because, we're in LA. It seems to be pretty central to a lot of the struggle of our folks, right? And so CSO, or Centro CSO, started in 1947. It was created by three people, and that was Fred Ross, Antonio Rios, and Edward Roybal. And the whole reason why it was created was to try to get Edward Roybal, or Ed Roybal, into city council. And it was victorious. He was the first Chicano to become elected into the city council of Los Angeles, which is significant, right? And ever since then, there were struggles for basically trying to win Chicanos, getting them into office. And so that was successful. It kept growing until 1951. There was Bloody Christmas, when LAPD officers got drunk on a Christmas evening, beat up some inmates inside of jail, and Centro CSO came out and did a huge campaign against them, and also again was victorious. They indicted a bunch of cops, fired a bunch of them, put some of them in jail. And to this day, it's been probably one of the biggest cases where that was able to happen. And it was because of a community-based organization like CSO.
Oh my gosh. And this is also the organization of Cesar Chavez and Dolores Huerta, right?
Yes, you're correct. So that was 1951, right? 1947, we started 1951, and you're correct. They were trained by CSO and, led this amazing struggle in the farms later, which became the United Farm Worker Coalition, or the UFW.
Yeah, I mean, you don't think about, because Los Angeles, obviously the second largest city in the United States, you don't think about that being a center of farm workers and that sort of thing. So yeah, absolutely.
Yes.
So now here we are in the 21st century. What's Central CSO up to these days?
Yeah, so it wasn't until recently that CSO came back in full force. Over in LA, some of us named Carlos Montes, Lupe Torres, they decided to revive CSO and go back to our roots, fighting for, self-determination of Chicanos in some ways, but also against police brutality. And other rights within Los Angeles. So I joined in 2015, and in 2015 we were mostly trying to win the struggle against, of course, Trump, because he was elected in 2016. But in 2015, around us, he was doing his speaking gigs, trying to go all over the most conservative parts of the country to get people in favor of him. And so that's what we were busy doing in 2015. And then in 2016, there were a large number of police brutality cases in our neighborhood of Boyle Heights.
So is that where you're focused primarily, Boyle Heights? And what is Boyle Heights, by the way?
Yes. So Boyle Heights is a neighborhood in Los Angeles. It's still part of Los Angeles, and it's within the county. There's, I think, 3 zip codes that make up Boyle Heights, the neighborhood. Over 150,000 people, by the way, in this smallish neighborhood. And I live there. I've been living there for over 7 years. And it's predominantly Chicano, Mexican, Central American folk. It wasn't always like that. Historically, there was a huge population of Japanese people who were basically pushed that way because of the concentration camps that, that whole...
During World War II.
Exactly.
Yes.
And then there was also a big Jewish population and African American, actually. But now it's predominantly Chicano, Latino, and that's where we live.
And so let's go back to the CSO here for a second. So they organize primarily in this neighborhood? And
Well, no, actually. CSO started in Los Angeles, in East LA, but it grew so big that there were chapters all over the Southwest. I've met people who were involved in it from Texas, Arizona, and some parts of like Northern California even. Some people have shown us their original card from back in the 60s. It's phenomenal, right?
Oh my gosh.
But there were quite a bit of chapters everywhere. And CSO, before I joined it, I think it was in the 90s, they had an office in Boyle Heights. And people always ask us, can we show up at your office? Like people who were involved in CSO back in the day. And I'm like, we don't have that office anymore. But you can see the building. It's still there. Yeah. So we mostly center our work in Boyle Heights or East LA. But because of the attacks by police and so forth, we actually are all over Los Angeles sometimes.
So what kind of issues are you involved in?
So we recently created 3 committees, and the 3 committees are immigration, fighting against privatization of education, so saving education, and then the last one, of course, is police brutality, fighting against the attacks by LAPD and the LA Sheriff's Department, or LASD.
Okay. Well, let's dig into these a little bit then, if that's all right.
Absolutely.
So why don't we start with the police accountability, because we touched on that a little bit. How does that look on the ground? What kinds of things are you doing on a day-to-day basis around police accountability?
Yeah, so like I had mentioned, in 2016, there were quite a bit of killings within the neighborhood of Boyle Heights. I actually lived like not even a block away from the police station there. It's called Hollenbeck. And they killed, in 2016, 2 adolescents. One was a 14-year-old named Jesse Romero, and prior to that, a 16-year-old named Jose Mendez. And there were quite a bit of others. I think in total, in less than a year, there were like 8 killings just in that neighborhood, in my neighborhood. And so since 2016, we've really gone full force against LAPD. And most recently, it's actually shifted to the LA Sheriff's Department, just because they've started to amp it up. And currently in office, there's a sheriff named Alex Villanueva, whose history is actually Puerto Rican, and he's married to a Chicana sheriff as well. And they're just really buckling down on attacking people on the ground every day. So we've really taken up the struggle against the killings that they commit, but also trying to win a policy against the sheriffs to try to remove the sheriff and many other things. But we're trying to win community control over them. Okay,
so you have demands for then more transparency, things like that? What does it look like? Maybe you can give us a little more specific.
Yes, absolutely. So it's the fight, of course, is called Community Control over LA Sheriff's Department, or Alex Villanueva. We use the slogan "Boot the Bandito," and that is in reference to a deputy gang that exists in the East LA Sheriff Station called the Banditos, or the Bandits, right? That's the word in Spanish. And they tattoo themselves with this really, I mean, in my opinion, it would be perceived as racist. There's a sombrero and a bandolier across their chest and some guns. And that's kind of like what the tattoo looks like. A lot of these sheriffs have them either on their ankles and so forth. But you get initiated into the gang allegedly by killing people, killing innocent folks like the ones that we fight justice for. And so basically we're trying to win community control over Alex Villanueva, the bandito, and win a charter amendment. And what the charter amendment would do is give more power to the current LASD Civilian Oversight Commission, which we refer to as the COC. It would give them more power, but establish it also as
what does COC stand for?
Yeah, the Civilian Oversight Commission.
Oh, Civilian Oversight Commission. Okay.
And
and this would oversee the sheriff's department.
Exactly.
Got it.
So 3 things that this charter amendment, this policy that we're trying to win, would do is establish it as a permanent entity, because currently it's not. It's kind of like the pseudo thing that existed in response to the atrocious things that they're doing. So first of all, make it permanent. Secondly, introduce the Inspector General to investigate the Sheriff's Department. The COC, or the Civilian Oversight Commission, would have more power to create a policy, and to eventually, the third thing, which is remove the sheriff. And that would be amazing if we could fire the current one, of course, who's Alex Villanueva. And right now there's a sheriff's race in LA County for a new sheriff. And whoever ends up being the new sheriff, control him as well.
Yeah, no, the system sounds flawed. Tell me a little bit more about this sheriff's. Is it like a gang inside the sheriff's department? That's
yes.
They're supposed to be, whatever they say they're supposed to be fighting the gangs and all that sort of stuff. What does that look like?
What's really funny, I'm going to go into a little bit more history. So way back in the day, there was like a shortage of material, like cloth. And so there was kind of like a moratorium put in place on excessive clothing material. And so there was actually this like counterculture within LA. A lot of it was Chicano dominated. And it was the zoot suiters. Mm-hmm. And so, there was a murder that happened around that time as well. And the case became the Sleepy Lagoon trial. And they, in response to that, led this really intense and super duper racist indictment of all of these teenagers who were just dressed as zoot suiters. And so there were some sailors that came in, beat up anybody who was dressed like a zoot suiter. And so, you're right that, allegedly the people who are fighting gangs now are being exposed for having gangs within their department. So the Banditos is one of the gangs that exists in East Los Angeles, which is predominantly Chicano or Latino. And, that's one gang. But there are purportedly 19 gangs within LA Sheriff's Department. And they're currently being investigated independently by the FBI. It's a current scandal, and I'm sure you probably have heard about it. If not, I'm going to tell you that they've been on not SNL, but one of those shows like the Comedy Central shows. They've done commentary on it, and it's becoming more widely known. But yeah, we want to expose them for that. And the sheriff is so confident and can't even avoid the acknowledgement of the fact that they exist, that he even went as far as like dismissing them being titled a gang by calling it a clique.
Oh my gosh, that's something else.
He was like, no, it's deputy cliques, okay? And yes, they have tattoos. Yes, there's an initiation process, but it's just part of this nice group of deputies who are just, friends. So
you mentioned that the Banditos purportedly, they kill people, other gang activities as well, I suppose. But whether that's true or not, it is a fact that the Los Angeles Sheriff's Department has been engaged in a number of murders under very questionable circumstances, or people dying. I know recently David Ordaz was a victim of Sheriff's Department killing. And could you talk a little bit about who David Ordaz is and what that case actually was?
Yes, absolutely. So David Ordaz Jr. out of the East LA area, where this Banditos gang exists, he was having a mental health crisis. This was March 14th, 2021, so in the peak of COVID-19. And so he was in his home, he was threatening to hurt himself, and his family, righteously concerned, decided to call 911. And, any normal person would call 911 if they need help, right? That's the idea when allegedly they created 911. If you need help, you call them. So David Ordaz Jr. was suffering a mental health crisis, and they called 911. And what ended up happening was there were, instead of having mental health experts show up or somebody to help diminish the situation, sheriffs showed up, East LA sheriffs, full clad in armed ways. And instead of de-escalating the situation, it turned into a horrific crime scene. They killed David Ordaz Jr. in front of his family, which included his mother, his sister. They said, well, he was actually going to hurt us. And so since that happened, a lot of people don't know about this trial, this case, but they're starting to realize that there's an issue here, because he's not the only person who has been killed recently within the last 2 years who has suffered a mental health episode.
So with David's case, Central CSO is involved. You're an organizer with them. What's the demand? What do we want to have happen here?
So with David Ordaz Jr., two of our members, CSO members, were there present when his killing happened. My husband, Jared, was there, and also Carlos Montes, another member of CSO. And they were there at the scene. Whenever there's a case in LA of when they kill someone, it's not this like one cop outside, this patrol cruiser outside and, some tape or something. No, it turns into this completely militarized scene. They block off many blocks around the perimeter. You can't even enter your home. You can't park, and parking is very, very difficult in LA. And then there's helicopters ready at their disposal. So it's very frightening. So we want there to be a demilitarization of the scenes that they create. We want there to, of course, be an end to these types of killings. With David Ordaz Jr.'s particular case, his family is demanding a better response to mental health crises. And actually, there's a banner that they carry that says, "Don't call 911 to save a life," which is horrendous. You shouldn't have to say that to people. And it's a very big banner that they display and march with even. Basically, what his family in particular and CSO has taken up is, it's not even like train officers better now. It's basically, let's create a solution to the mental health crises that our people are suffering, and do not call 911, which is awful,
Yeah, and this is not an isolated case. It's what Edgar Ortiz. If you could talk a little bit
Yes.
about him and what this story was, or any others you wish to talk about, how this issue of mental health and the sheriff's mishandling and even killing people that are having a crisis.
Yeah, the LA Sheriff's Department is completely useless. They're really bad at their job, right? So Edgar Ortiz is another Chicano who was suffering another mental health episode. It just happened March 3rd, 2022 in the city of Bellflower. And there was an unrelated situation happening when Edgar was killed. And that was some race car drivers. They were kind of like, I forget the naming of it, but it's folks who were kind of like joyriding, spinning around on the street, and it turned into like a street party. And it was very, very close to where Edgar lived. And so it was unrelated, but they were racing, and LA Sheriff's Department officers showed up. They were trying to make it stop, and Edgar heard it, and he was schizophrenic. He came out of his house, and he just kind of started walking and was having an episode. And somebody who was on the street said that they feared for their lives, that they felt like they were getting attacked. There were already LA Sheriff's deputies on the scene, so they saw him approaching. They said that he looked menacing. He's actually not even fully conscious of what's going around him, so he probably was walking in a particular way. And what ended up happening is they shot him. They killed him on the spot.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, it's and they said, oh, he was scary. The sheriffs are already amped up because there's this party happening on the street. They're trying to disperse the crowd, and so they're already worked up. And they see somebody with a mental health episode
And these are very young people.
Yes, very young. Many of these folks are, they were not even in their 40s, not even in their mid 30s. But the sheriffs do this a lot. In East LA, there was another case that happened not too long ago as well. His name was Anthony Daniel Vargas, a very loving person. And his family talks about how when he was killed, I believe this was in 2017 or 2018. But with that particular case, LA sheriffs were called into the neighborhood where he lived. It's a neighborhood called Ramona Gardens. And they showed up because there was allegedly a thief or two thieves. And so Anthony was just walking. He was a very tall person. And they show up on the scene very aggressively. It's not like they roll up very slowly, come out and say, hey, everybody, No, they show up and it's very scary immediately. And so people ran. It wasn't just Anthony Daniel Vargas who ran from the deputies who showed up all of a sudden ready and armed to look for these allegedly thieves. And so Anthony ran and they shot him on the spot. They shot him 14 times, twice to the head, and he was executed in the street. And not only that, it's not like they come in swiftly and, take bodies away after they kill someone. It was a militarized scene for hours. And, what's horrendous about that case as well is that the LA sheriffs had the audacity to post on their social media, we accidentally killed the wrong person. Can you all help us please find the thieves that we were originally looking for? And I mean, that was all social media. It was public. His family having, to deal with the fact that they just killed one of their loved ones had to see that on social media. That's the LA sheriffs.
Oh my gosh. I mean, it's this police killings have been happening around the country, and we're coming up, just past the anniversary of George Floyd from Minneapolis, who was killed. And I remember, early on, as these videos start to come out, I'm guessing this has been happening for decades or centuries, I guess you could even say. But, Los Angeles, I remember Rodney King being beaten, and which sparked riots in the late 1980s. And even more recently, Andres Guardado was in the aftermath of George Floyd. So it's an ongoing thing, and it's good that CSO is involved in this. And so how do you, can you talk a little bit about how you tackle, how do you organize the community to get involved, and what kinds of, how you bring this out to them and get them to have a stake in the fact that how their communities are policed?
Yes, absolutely. So what we try to do is quickly canvass a neighborhood. And what I mean by that is we literally get on the streets and go door to door. We door knock and we tell people, hey, do you recall the night in question of a killing? And many of them, when they do answer the door, say, yes, that was horrible. I was trying to come home after work and I couldn't. My home became a crime scene. So they're already upset. And so then we educate them on what actually happened, because from their viewpoint, they just can't make it home. There's suddenly police there. And initially, sometimes the opinion of a person is that, oh, they're up to no good. The police are here to help us, right? But then they find out that they can't make it to their house, so they're already upset. Like, why does a crime scene that's not even near my home interrupt my everyday? And so then you educate them on the fact that they took a life after a 911 call, for example, happens. And they immediately get upset and they say, well, we don't want that anymore. What can we do to help? And so we educate them one-on-one sometimes. Sometimes we end up having events that are right at the house where someone is killed. With, David Ordaz Jr.'s family, they have currently outside of their fence a banner that says rest in peace, and they give you more information on the case. And that's very much to try to educate the community, the public, on what truly happens. With many of these cases, the sheriffs spin their own commentary on what actually happens. And many of them, the sheriff is notorious in LA for coming out and saying that they're just criminals, that they're gangsters. And so we try to combat that narrative. But also with the charter amendment struggle, where we're trying to win more community control of them, we try to make it to areas where either the sheriff is having a public event to win re-election, and we disrupt them. We also show up to Civilian Oversight Commission meetings or Board of Supervisor meetings to try to educate, because a lot of people in the public do attend those, and we want them on our side, right? We want to convince the Board of Supervisors or the Civilian Oversight Commission to vote in favor of this so that they have more power over them as well. And the community really is super duper responsive to it, especially when we show up to public gatherings. And we tell them, did you know that there's deputy gangs? And many of them are not shocked by it. They're like, well, that's the sheriff's corruption for you. You know, they know previous sheriffs in LA County who, you know, all of them are super notorious for being scandalous, right? You have Sheriff McDonald, who was before Villanueva, who was super anti-undocumented, did horrifying things to the undocumented population in LA. You had Tanaka. You had Lee Baca, the infamous Lee Baca, who is currently sitting in jail for the horrendous mistreatments of evidence and so forth. You know, incredible. So it's a long time coming. I think a lot of people, if they're not already on our side, they get educated and want to do everything they can to help.
So I want to turn to this a little bit, because I know we could talk a long time about the really good work that the Centro CSO is doing for police accountability. But you mentioned two other committees. So let me ask you about immigration a little bit here. And so what's the demand for around immigrant rights, or what are you actually asking for, and how do you go about making that happen?
Yes, absolutely. So I sit on both the Immigration Committee and the Police Brutality Committee. And in immigration, our slogan or our campaign is legalization for all of the undocumented. It seems like a very unattainable thing, but we're getting closer, and especially in LA County and also in the state of California. It's a sanctuary state, right? What that means is if you're undocumented, you can get a driver's license, for example. That's something that doesn't exist everywhere in the US. But legalization would give somebody who's undocumented the ability to become, in quotes, legalized, or some people refer to it as getting papers. What that means is you no longer are put in the risk of being deported. You're no longer at that risk. And so we want that. We want that for everybody. The reason that we say legalization, however, is because sometimes people's origin of country of origin, they can't have dual citizenship with the U.S. That's the fact for Mexicans, for example. You can't have dual citizenship if you're a Mexican national and then have U.S. citizenship at the same time. So we feel that legalization, especially if you're like a migrant who continuously for work crosses back and forth through the border, it would make sense to have immediate legalization, and you can stay uninterrupted going back and forth to work.
Well, it would be a lot different than it is now. I mean, the border is heavily militarized, and probably the most militarized part of the United States. So,
yeah, it's true. I drove through, I believe it was Arizona. There's a permanent checkpoint. There's permanent checkpoints, and it's really scary. I mean, I'm a U.S. citizen, but it was really scary for me too, because at that point you start questioning, you know, like, am I gonna make it through this border, this checkpoint? Mm-hmm. And it's, you know, there are current checkpoints that are within the 100-mile radius of the Mexico-U.S. border that can basically, you know, pull you over and investigate you if they think you're not a citizen.
Yeah, no, it's terrible. Let me ask you also then about the third committee, which is education, right?
Yes, absolutely.
So what kinds of things is the education committee of CSO doing?
So we are trying to save public education and fight against the privatization of education. LA is actually one of the first places where charter schools started. They started in the 90s, and now it's exploded all over the country. For example, I believe it's in New Orleans, where after Hurricane Katrina, charter schools started coming in, and now there's I believe the city of New Orleans has 0 public schools. They're 100% charter schools, privately owned and privately operated. We always use that as an example of what we don't want Los Angeles to look like. Once you have the complete non-transparency to do whatever you want with education, it can be very, very scary and also divisive for regular students who are trying to get an education.
And it's union busting too. Almost all of our cities, including New Orleans, had. I work with the Chicago Teachers Union, so this is something I know about. But you have unionized teachers unions, and all of a sudden you say, okay, we're going to have all this be a charter school, and the unions disappear in most cases. There was a similar situation in Puerto Rico after the hurricanes and the disasters there, where they moved to try to make everything be a charter school. So it's union busting, it's privatization, and so
exactly.
So we in the Chicago Teachers Union are supporting you.
Awesome.
Actually, we're starting to unionize the charter schools, and maybe a future Fight Back Radio will have something about that. But that's something that's close to my heart. So I appreciate the work that you're doing in Los Angeles in the CSO. I know you identify yourself as a proud Chicana, and even the CSO, as you talked about it over the years, how it's evolved. The issue of self-determination has become a more of an issue, I think, now than previously. And so, could you talk about self-determination and what you think it means to be a Chicana?
Yeah, thank you, and I appreciate you wording it in that manner, Richard. So yes, I'm a super proud Chicana. And what that means is I'm one of the people who is fighting, like you said, for self-determination, the right to determine our future and our destiny. And I'm trying to fight that for the Chicano nation. We call it Aztlán. And that would be what a lot of people know as the Southwest, or the area that used to be part of Mexico. It went through a large history of not just Mexico, but Spain and other colonizers. And now it's part of the U.S., right? And not really militarized, but in a state manner. And so our nation is there. And it's been in development since 1848, when there was annexation of the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo. And so, it's not like you have to be born and raised in this particular area to know that, there is a nation there. And yeah, we want to win rights for ourselves. We think that there are 5 reasons why this nation exists in that area. And it's a common, we call them common characteristics, but it's basically a common land, which, I did mention was once Mexico. So I'm sure you can think of the states that those are, the southern part of California, some parts of Nevada, Colorado, Utah, Texas, right? And these are areas that predominantly in many places are inhabited by Chicanos, by my people. And so land is one of them. Language, we have a particular language. It's like a mixture of English, Spanish, from all regions of everywhere. There's regions that are Mexican, regions of Central America, and then a made up one. It's all made up, and it's an actual language. We call it Calo, and not like Frida Kahlo, but Kahlo with the C and an acento at the end to enunciate the O, Kahlo. And we also have a common culture, a common economy. Many of us have very specific jobs that deal with our areas. And the last one, of course, is history. We have a common history, and we've been developing since 1848.
So this is something that's different than just being an American, or something that's different than being a Mexican as well. Yes,
absolutely. I mean, if you think of 1848, it wasn't like, the U.S. suddenly acquired this area. Here comes the gold rush. It wasn't like they threw everybody out of these areas. They didn't say everybody has to pack up and leave because now we're going to start to inhabit it by U.S. people. colonizers. No, they did do that, but they left people there, and they stole their land, but they left people there. People didn't move away. So since 1848, people have been developing. There were, maybe it was part of Mexico, so there were Mexicans who suddenly have now found themselves within a new border. And so since then, people have stayed there. And of course, migration has brought in a lot more Mexicanos, especially during the bracero programs, which was when labor brought in workers to, create railroads for the mining. And so all of this has created a new peoples. And there's definitely been a development of us in that area.
So if you have this view of of self-determination for Chicano people, what does that mean on the ground for somebody who lives and works in Los Angeles in a major metropolitan area? And how do you fight for self-determination? Maybe it's a little bit what you've been talking about with the police, but could you elaborate on that a little bit?
Yes. Our 3 committees and the work that we do with CSO very much tackle that on. We're not yelling it maybe every single day, but we do on certain days. We want self-determination, and like our 3 committees are fighting. We fight against, like you said, police brutality, right? They gun us down currently. You could be 14 years old, you could be 16 years old, and they take your life away. That's the destiny that we are not wanting. That's something that we would never want. Nobody would want that. And so that's one thing we would want to have control over, our lives. Secondly, of course, we want those folks who are creating new Chicanos, to have the ability to enter the U.S. and not be deported and sent back. So we fight for legalization and against deportations and against militarization at the border, since Los Angeles and many areas of the Southwest are very, very close to the U.S.-Mexico border. And then our education, our poor education in this country, right? You can't even learn about Christopher Columbus without glorifying him, right? For example. But if we had the ability to determine what education our children see, it would be very, very different than what is taught. And so, self-determination would be, we would be able to determine what our children are learning in the schools, hopefully fighting for a better future for those who are employed in education. We don't want the teachers to be exploited how they are, or their rights to be taken away. So, self-determination would just be a betterment of our people and be able to control what we think is best for ourselves, as opposed to being killed, as opposed to being deported, as opposed to being fed lies in our education system while exploiting these poor people who educate us.
So let me ask you about the indigenous people who were here before any of us were here,
yes.
and who are part of who Chicanos are as well, or Mexicans, or most of this continent. And so there's been, but there's also fights for indigenous people to have sovereignty in the Southwest as well as other parts of the Western Hemisphere. And so how do you reconcile that?
Yeah, so when I say that we fight for self-determination of Aztlán or the Chicano nation, people do get scared, right? They think, oh my gosh, you want like an ethnocentric state, right? Where you want to kick out people who are not Chicano. That's definitely not what we want to do. We just want to determine our destiny, our future, and fight for everybody who's within that area. So like you mentioned, Richard, there are many indigenous folks who were never part of Mexico, were never part of Spain. They were their own people, and then everybody was changing borders, everybody was changing ownership, and they're still around. And they currently are, right? They're not going to go anywhere. And we want them to have sovereignty. We want them to keep fighting for their right to exist as well. Currently, there are reservations in many places of the Southwest or Aztlán. And a lot of it comes to light whenever there's an immigration battle actually at the border. When Trump was doing his border wall, there's a tribe, a nation that's at the border. Their area is actually both in Mexico and in the U.S. And so when Trump was wanting to build that wall, they came out in full force and said, no, you're building a wall within our land. And so we united with that. And so, we definitely uphold, the right of other peoples to exist. And it's actually much more than just the indigenous or the American Indians themselves. There's other people within our areas who have been there for a very long time. In Boyle Heights, like I mentioned before, there are Japanese folks who have been there since the 40s, and they're under attack all the time. There's an organization called Save Our Seniors in Boyle Heights who during COVID-19 came out in full force because these poor folks who got thrown into Boyle Heights during the concentration camp and super racist history against them are now at risk of being taken away from their homes. And they're not doing anything to save their lives or protect them under COVID-19. Many of them have died. And, we want everybody to be able to exist, not currently the way that things are being run.
I'm from Chicago, and I know been immigrants from Mexico to Chicago for probably as long as this country's existed, a long time. But more recently, there's been, since the 1980s, there's been a huge wave of immigration from Mexico. I think in the aftermath of some of the trade agreements, where people were forced out of Mexico and needed to find livelihood, and a lot of the people from that community will say things like, Chicano, that's a West Coast thing, or they'll see it as divisive of dividing Mexican American immigrants who identify with Mexico with people that are second or their children or grandchildren. How do you address those kind of issues?
So I love this question, Richard. This is like my favorite question. So I would say let's compare it to other nationalities, right? It's not exactly ever going to be the same or a fair comparison, but I think it's fun to do it and also puts into light what they're trying to say. So I myself, on a personal level, I identified and came to the understanding that I was Chicana when I lived in the state of Georgia. I wasn't even anywhere within the West Coast or the Southwest region. I had actually never even lived there when I realized I was Chicana. And it's not even about realizing either. You just are. You just are what you are because the U.S. made it that way. For example, you have African Americans in the southeastern area, which I love to call the Black Belt South Nation. It's another nation, and their history, much like Chicanos, was forced by this U.S. system, right? And it's not like they chose or came to the realization one day, you know what, I'm African American. I am my own nationality. No, sometimes it's a way of life. It's those 5 characteristics I mentioned earlier. People stay within those areas who are African American. People love that area, rightfully so. They have formed their own language. They contribute to the economy in certain ways. They have a shared history. They have their own language too. I'm sure people have heard of Ebonics. That is an official language of my siblings in the Black Belt South, much like Galo. And so what I would say to your question is, would somebody, for example, who lives in Chicago and is African American, would they not be Black if they didn't live in Chicago? Or they're not living in the Southeast, so does that not make them Black?
No, of course not.
Yeah.
So, good point. I want to point out to our listeners that Fight Back News has published a pamphlet that Marisol Márquez, our guest here, has written called My Journey to Aslan. And we're going to put that in the show notes, but it deals with some of these questions that we're talking about here, and Sol's personal journey, I think, as well is intertwined with that. So I encourage everybody to look at the show notes, to click on that, and also to check out Fight Back News, fightbacknews.org, to find this. And I think it'll enrich your understanding of it too. And so we encourage people to do that. I also wanted to ask you next. I know you're a relatively new mother, and so congratulations.
Thank you.
But I wanted to ask you, what are your hopes for your daughter? How do you see, what life do you hope for her, and what that we can accomplish? And so, if you could talk a little bit about that and how that motivates your activism.
Yes, absolutely, and thank you so much, Richard. It's amazing being a new mom. I think I was talking with you earlier, but I'm an older sister to 3 siblings, 3 younger sisters. And I came into it thinking, oh, I'm going to be like that, a big sister. No, it's totally different. But everything I do every day, I always, before I had my baby, I always thought, nobody should live the way that we live currently. There is no reason whatsoever why any child should be killed by the sheriff's office or the LAPD. Or anywhere else in the country. An 11-year-old whose last name is Toledo should not be killed, for just walking around.
Chicago, yes.
Yeah, exactly. You had, I forget his name, but the African-American boy who was dressed up in a samurai outfit, who was just walking. I mean, there are so many other kids who walk around who are not, Chicano or African-American, and they're holding little guns and nobody guns them down, right? So my child, she's going to grow up around this. And that's such a scary reality to know that she could just be walking or having a mental health crisis and, someone wants to take her life away, to be initiated into a gang. Her education is going to be suffering, and her teachers and her classes are going to be overcrowded. She's going to be, under threat of being co-located by a charter school, and a segregation system is going to be in place. Like, all of these things are things that I want to not happen to anyone. And especially now that the stakes have been risen because I have a daughter who's going to grow up around this area. And her friends, her family members are undocumented, and nobody should be, stolen from their home and deported across, another border where they're not even from anymore. They've been here all their lives. Some people come over when they're little babies. This is their home. So why not give them the opportunity immediately to have papers and not be deported?
No, that's good. Let me ask you also about, I want to ask you a little bit about how you got involved in all this in the first place. I mean, you talked about you were living in Georgia, and your pamphlet talks a little bit about this too. But, how did, people don't just wake up and say, hey, I think I'm going to become an activist. And so what's your story? What made you, what triggered you to have this life of fighting for justice and for self-determination and freedom for people?
Yeah, so my parents themselves were undocumented. They're both from Mexico, and my mom is from a northern Mexican state called Durango, and my dad is from a central Mexican state called Hidalgo. And they came over undocumented, just like many Mexicans do, into the U.S. My mom swam the river, Rio Grande is what she calls it. And my dad came over on a train, smuggled himself over. And they met in the orange orchards of Florida, and in the state of Florida. And that's where I was born. I was born there. They were literally picking oranges across from each other in a row. My dad was in one tree and my mom was in the other tree. And my
romantic.
Yeah, isn't that early in the dawn with the dew on the trees? But my mom's parents told my mom to invite him over for lunch because he was really skinny, and she had made that lunch, so he fell in love with her cooking right away. But anyway, so my parents were farm workers, and very early on in the state of Florida, there's a coalition of workers, migrant farm workers, and their name is the CIW, the Coalition of Immokalee Workers, and they were part of that coalition. It's an organization that's trying to become unionized and help farm workers be unionized, kind of like the UFW or the United Farm Workers. And my parents started to be educated by them to fight for a better, either better working conditions or better pay. And so, early on, they started educating me on what is right, what is just, and what we deserve as the people who create all the wealth of the country and literally feed people, right? Or not just in America or the US, but all over the world. And so I learned that early on as my parents moved from state to state across the East Coast, across the West Coast. And they would always tell us as we were working in the fields, do you remember what it was like to do farm work in Washington State, and how we had, very rigid lunch breaks, and you had a bathroom. And then we grew up in Georgia working in the fields, and there was no sight of water, no sight of a bathroom. So early on, they were like, it's time for a strike. We need to fight. So I was in my first strike when I was 13. I didn't know what was happening. I just know that my mom and dad told me to stop working, and I had to convince everybody else. And so, they were my first teachers in fighting back and becoming active and convincing people that this struggle was good for everybody. And so that was the first time I understood that. But ever since then, seeing them struggle to try to get papers and being so scared of La Migra or, Border Patrol showing up or U.S. Customs showing up in the fields and witnessing when they would show up and people running to their cars and escaping, it was horrifying. And so I realized like, oh my gosh, my friends' parents shouldn't have to be hiding or running away because they're just working. They're just trying to feed, everybody and earn a living. They shouldn't have to be criminalized for being part of the system, part of the working class. And so that was conscious inducing. But then, I was then educated at school when I joined the MECHA chapter. MECHA is the Movimiento Estudiantil Chicano de Aztlán, or, the Chicano movement of education. And I joined it in high school when I lived in Georgia. My brother told me, he's like, you need to go. You're a Chicana. And I was like, what is that? And so, so then I started realizing, oh my goodness, this is a specific attack on my people. I started becoming educated. It's like they don't want us to fight back against this. They don't want us to organize ourselves. So way later, after all of this, I joined a really cool organization that is currently still in existence. It's called Students for a Democratic Society. And I joined it when I was in Florida. I moved there because I fell in love with this guy whose name is Jared Hamill. And he's my current husband, my partner, also a member of Freedom Road Socialist Organization like me. And that's who I had my baby with. And the rest is history. After that, I realized, oh my goodness, there is no reason to live every day in America unless we want to fight to make it better.
Well, and you're doing your parents and your family proud by your work in the CSO.
Thank you.
Can you tell us a little bit about how to reach the CSO or social media or whatever you want?
Yeah, absolutely. So Centro CSO has many ways that you can communicate with us. We have a hotline number which all of our members have access to. So if you do text us or call us, one of us is going to answer, and it might not be me because there are many of us who answer this phone number. But our number, you can text us and call us, is 323-943-2030. And I'm going to repeat it, 323-943-2030.
We'll put it in the show notes too.
Yeah. And then we have our email address. It's centrocso@gmail.com. And then you can definitely find us as Centro CSO on TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter. I don't use all of those, so
I'm impressed.
Yeah,
I'm impressed.
I haven't even ever logged into the Centro CSO TikTok, but we have members who actively use it and try to educate me, even though I've never logged in. And you can reach us there. We're very active on all social media platforms, and people are welcome to communicate with us on there.
So before we leave, I wanted to ask you also about, there's a conference coming up in Tijuana that your organization's participating in. Can you talk a little bit about what, and it's more of an international perspective because there's people coming from all over the world, I believe, or certainly all over this hemisphere. So could you talk a little bit about that and
Yes.
why you're involved in it?
So President Biden actually is creating a summit and inviting many people within the continent to attend, many countries, to talk about the work that the working class does in the continent. However, they decided, whoever is organizing this Biden summit, decided not to invite Nicaragua, Cuba, and Venezuela. And so in response to that, Mexico, the Mexican president, he decided that they would help create another summit to counter that. And so it's taking place in Tijuana, and it's called the Worker Summit of the Americas, where, yes, Cuba, Venezuela, and Nicaragua will be there, as well as many others who will be kind of like challenging the narrative that, there is an okay thing to uphold areas that are building socialism or the right of the working class to be at the top. And so we're going to be there. We're going to be attending it. I mean, it would be really bad of us not to go when Tijuana is so close. But we're organizing many people, especially those who are working class within Los Angeles, to attend. And we are going to be taking different cars there. And we've even tried to submit one of our people to be a speaker there. We've tried to submit Carlos Montes' name. So hopefully he makes it through and people can see him speaking there. But we really want to uphold basically the work that all of these countries are doing within the continent of America, both North and South and Central. And we want them to understand that the fight is very much alive to win rights for the working class.
Well, I think Carlos and others that will be going will be better representatives of the working class in our country than Joe Biden would be, for sure, and whoever he would bring to that. And yes, so thank you so much for this interview. It's been a real pleasure to talk to you. So, and I wish you the best in your struggles going forward.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
Excellent. Marisol Márquez, bringing you theory and practice together from the streets of Los Angeles. I want to remind our listeners to check out Sol's pamphlet, My Journey to a Salon. It's available at fightbacknews.org. And I want to remind you, fightbacknews.org is the producer of this show, bringing you news and views from the people's struggles. And I hope also I just want to remind people to give Fight Back Radio a plug to your friends. Give us 5 stars on your whatever, whether you do Spotify or Apple or whatever you do, and give us a quick review saying that we're good, and this all helps move us up and helps our make us available to more and more people, and we appreciate that. If you want to reach me, I'm at richard.fightbackradio@gmail.com. You can also reach us on Twitter at FightbackNews or on Instagram at FightbackNews. And so these are ways you can reach us. We'll put all this stuff in the show notes. But also, I want to thank, before we go today, I want to thank our crack production team of Vince Olson and Shane Tremley. This one particular, they did a good job. We moved out of the studio and set up somewhere else, and I did some things that made the sound more difficult, and they just did a fabulous job making this sound good. So I want to thank you guys. Also, I want to give a shout out to Marawi Jarima, who's helping us, consulting with us right now. And so I want to thank everybody. And for our entire Fight Back Radio team, I'm Richard Berg, saying until next time, all power to the people.